Good morning, California, United States. Good afternoon, Switzerland. Everybody who's just coming back from a swim in some lake or in some river. Whereas here in San Francisco, we're experiencing another gloomy summer morning of fog. It's great to be here today and actually have our fourth fireside chat with two very, very exciting women. And I'm very happy actually to have this all women session today. And a few words of technical stuff before we get started. So welcome to everybody. We cannot see you, we cannot hear you, but there is a chance for you to interact with us through the Q&A function, which you find right on the bottom of the screen. Feel free to ask, actually feel encouraged to ask questions anytime. We will either build them into the conversation if they are a good fit, or we might answer them later towards the second half of this conversation. The total event will be about 45 minutes. 30 minutes will be the conversation, that free-flowing conversation between my two speakers and myself, and then we will take on some of the questions you asked that we weren't able to answer before. Also, please note that this session is being recorded. So if you have to jump off for any reason, you can always come back later to it, and you will find it on YouTube, usually at least 2 days after the event. Okay, so this is the Swissnex Fireside Chat. The reason we have started these chats is to bring together the perspectives that seem to be more and more diverging between what's going on in Switzerland and what's going on over here in the United States, and engage in a conversation, a speculation for how our world might change as we go through this deep moment of disruption and transformation, where our lives and literally every part of our lives seems to become more and more digital. I believe that I have witnessed actually that the spirit is quite different in Switzerland than it is here in the US, which is why we find it very important to bring in a voice from over here and then a voice from Switzerland, and to choose people that are not necessarily from the same industry, not necessarily from the same discipline, but actually bring together very different viewpoints and very different experiences in this very historic moment, actually. Okay, so with no further ado, I want to welcome my two speakers today. We will start off with Andrea Staudacher. She is from Bern. She's currently in Bern in Switzerland. She is a future food expert with a lot of expertise in all things insects and the future of us actually, of our food systems and how insects can play an important role in there. And not only does she think about the future, she actually currently focuses on organizing dinners and catering, as well as workshops, lectures on the subject of nutrition, but also morality, shifting values, and innovation. And she's actually currently working on her new book, which is going to be on the future of food again, and will come out in November, so stay tuned for that. And also, she can actually be seen on Swiss radio and television for Andrea's FutureFoodLab. So welcome, Andrea. Very happy to have you with us today. Our second speaker is Cocquyt. She is actually originally from Germany, but lives here in San Francisco, is a super connector, a serial entrepreneur, has worked for Genentech's innovation team for a while, but since has founded her own startups, advises startups, is an angel investor, and is involved with various entrepreneurial initiatives, and has founded the Guild, which is an AI community engagement platform for entrepreneurs and leaders. And I believe just now she's soon closing the applications for her current program, which is geared towards female entrepreneurs from around the world, and shall empower them to build successful ventures. So very exciting to have two power women here with me today. So I would like to start off this round by asking you, one of you each, what does your new normal look like these days? And maybe Anne, can you tell us a little bit about the moment that you're in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. This is such a pleasure. And an early one, I have to say. I'm not usually My best at 8 a.m. in the morning, but we'll see. So the new normal definitely looks for me that the day starts a little bit later. And I think it's really important that we listen to our rhythms and we get enough sleep, especially in times like these when there's so much strain on our mental health and so much stress out there in the world, right? The new normal is definitely virtual for me. So we've been an in-person networking community for a long time. And I've really pushed our technology to put people in contact that can meet for a glass of wine or a nice little champagne or a nice good coffee, a cup of coffee at the nice new cafe around the corner. And so now all that has gone away. But it doesn't matter in the virtual world, right? We can still connect. We can use this technology that we have here to connect and find business partners, co-founders, investors, or just somebody who is in the same boat as us. If we're, for instance, parents and are trying to, parent in this pandemic time and lead our businesses and get our careers to the next step or whatever our ambitions are. And so definitely a lot of change, but also change for the better, because now we have a global community we can engage all over the world. So we have people from Switzerland, from Azerbaijan, from Germany, from Slovenia. Somebody just joined yesterday. So it helps us really become more global. So I'm excited about it, but of course there's also a lot of anxiety of what's next and what's happening, because as you say, Gioia, the United States and San Francisco looks very different right now to Switzerland from what I hear. And so that's something to really keep an eye on right now.
Thank you, Anne. And can I just follow up on that and ask you, what's the one thing you currently miss the most about the olden days?
Yeah, that's a good question. The most I miss the social gatherings here at our place and the dinners and bringing people together and having a waffle brunch in the morning, because my husband is from Belgium and he makes very good waffles. So we invite people over all the time. And we just said, oh, we're selling our place here and moving away. So we said, oh, there's not going to be another waffle brunch. And that was really sad. So I would say definitely those social interactions with our wonderful friends and community here in San Francisco.
I hear you. I hear you. Andrea, what about your new normal, or maybe old normal, or what does it feel like in Switzerland? Where are you at currently?
Yeah, I'm just sitting in front of the beautiful river Aare. I just took a swim. It's about 20 degrees warm water and outside temperature is about 30, 32. So I'm sweating right now, but life for me is more about being away from digital devices, computers, tablets, whatsoever. I completely am losing interest in all of those things. I'm more connected to nature, and then I'm more connected to the humans that I'm engaging with. Since it's still possible here to engage in small groups, I think just today the government decided to allow bigger venues up to 100 or 200 people. So now it's more about connecting with people for me, and to really feel, touch, even hug sometimes if it's possible. And I think this crisis really made me more centered. It gave me a center, since I'm more aware of my surrounding, of the other humans all around me. And my daughter, it was a really intimate, tough time, since I'm a single parent. It was hard working and parenting at the same time, but it was also a great opportunity, because maybe it will never happen again to be this close and to share this many time, and it also connected us even more, me and my daughter. So I'm also really grateful for this virus, because it also created lots of good things for me, since I'm not affected, or any of my family or friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see that, and actually to some extent also empathize, because I think the time we are given now with the people that we live with is quite unique. We were always thinking outside the house, and now we're just like living in these quarters, and it brings you much closer to your partner or your children. Hopefully, the other scenario is that it will go apart, right? Because you just can't handle each other. But I think that the beauty is when that is not the case. So I would fully agree. Andrea, how has your work been affected? And how has it, do you feel like there has been a change in the appreciation for your work? I also know that death is a topic that you are actively researching and working on. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, since that in a way is so close and has become so much closer as we're actually on the brink of this, or have been on the brink of death collectively with this virus?
Yes, it's actually pretty funny, since I was interested in changing my topic as an artist, shifting from food to death. And maybe it sounds strange, but these two topics have a lot in common. But death is definitely a bigger, a wider, and a topic that I'm working with since a long time, but I didn't felt mature enough to deal with it in an artistic perspective. And so I decided in January to work as an undertaker, to make an apprenticeship as an undertaker. And me personally, I was really scared of dying, of illness, sickness, whatever. And since I'm working with dead people, with bodies, with attending a lot of funerals, talking to people who lost a loved one, this fear has become more less. So I'm less afraid of dying. It's more natural to me now. And then Corona hit Switzerland, and suddenly everybody around me was talking more about death and dying and the possibility that life ends. And even young people were suddenly aware of it. And it was really strange for me, because for me personally, it helped me to deal with this topic better. And I noticed this change in a lot of my in the people around me. So I think the more you engage with something that you fear, the less dangerous it gets. So yeah, and the work is really interesting, because there's a lot of processes that I wasn't really aware of. And of course, we also had people dying of Corona that I had to bury. And yeah, it was strange times, because at the funerals, you were not allowed to hug each other or to comfort each other physically when we had the lockdown. So it was really strange. But in the same way, it was also a really strong connection. I felt a really strong connection towards everybody that I worked with. And yeah, my work, I mean, with a little kid at home, it was difficult. Yeah, lots of night shifts and not enough sleep and all that. Yeah, trying to make it work in a way.
I hear you. How it's really fascinating, and I think this, what you're saying about when we think about something, we actually sort of dive and immerse in a topic. We can parse it out better in our brains and actually understand and lose some fear. And has there been anything for you in this period? I don't know, like, I think in a way we have never thought about pandemics as an imminent threat to our part of the world. We knew that was a thing that happens elsewhere. Has it somehow changed your appreciation, let's say, for life, for health, but also possibly the comfort to think about large crises and large dangers and how those might affect you as an individual?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a crisis and a traumatic event for almost everybody in the world, right? And traumatic events have this tendency of just like getting you back to like, okay, what is really important? Why am I doing the work I'm doing? why am I the founder of this startup or this company, or, you know, what do I want to leave behind in this world? And I think a lot of people, especially in the Guild right now with all our entrepreneurs, are going through that process of asking themselves, you know, is it time to persevere, or is it time to give up and do something new? And I think it all comes down to the question of your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And then just throw out all this other stuff that's there that doesn't connect to your why. And that's definitely something I've gone through. And what I'm really passionate about is helping other early stage female entrepreneurs get to that next step and launch their businesses and build a business that they're really excited about, and do it with the tools and the resources they need. And it happens that I have those tools and resources and the connections here in Silicon Valley through these 8 years that I spend here networking at each and every possible networking event, including Swissnex and all these amazing communities here. And so I said, you know what, I want to double down on that. I really want to double down on the Guild Academy, which is our program where we teach entrepreneurs how to launch their idea. And I get very excited about that when people see something in the world that's happening right now and they say, I need to change that. I'm not taking no for an answer. It can be that we don't yet have tests that are 24-hour turnaround or home tests, right? Or why is it so hard to get food delivered? Or why are these Zoom calls so you know, not working in a social setting with my family, or whatever it is people experience? They're trying to solve it. And I want to give them the tools to do that. And it's been really interesting to see how many people, even in these times when you think like, okay, everybody is gonna just, you know, put the head in the sand and stop doing and working, it's actually quite the opposite effect that I've seen, that a lot of people have more time now and connect back to their why and their passion, and they say, okay, you know what, this is the time I want to launch my business and we want to learn how to do that. And that's been super cool to see, and has given me a lot of energy for the Guild and for, you know, pursuing this community and keep working on it and putting events on in the new digital world. And yeah, I have to say it's been quite an awakening for me personally as well. And on the personal side, similar to you, Andrea, I have actually spent a lot of time outdoors and went hiking and backpacking, and we have a little van, so travel in a socially distanced setting is a little easier. So we've taken that van all over the Pacific Northwest here in the United States and explored these incredible mountains and forests and beaches. And it's been absolutely beautiful that summer too. And that's one other thing that I think a lot of people are confused by or maybe struggling with, is that your personal experience right now, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody feels the same way. And I see a lot of people project, even in advertising and in marketing, and say, surely you must be this and that, and therefore we give you a solution. And I always say, well, wait a minute, not everybody is feeling that same way. You have to connect with people now more than ever, because everybody is experiencing this moment in time in a very, very different way, emotionally, psychologically, and how we digest this massive change that's disrupting our lives. And for me, I'm a very data-driven person, so I've definitely learned a lot about virology, more than I ever hoped to. And I try to make my decisions based on the data that's out there. And unfortunately, the data right now doesn't come from the government. It comes from other sources. And that's been very interesting to see, that I need to go in deep in my network and connect with the right experts there to get the information I feel like I need to make decisions, even around like, should I go to the park or not? And so I'm definitely a data-driven person and try to look at the data that's coming out in the studies from all over the world, not just the United States, and try to make my decisions based on that, and also try to make my decisions for my business based on that. So in March, it was clear to me we would not be able to have a conference of 500 to 1,000 people this September in San Francisco. And it was based on the data, right? And a lot of people still thought at that point there would be a thing, because by that time we'd be over it. And yeah, so I recommend to everybody, like, you know, get your facts and get the data, and then draw your own conclusions, because there's no playbook right now.
Yeah, very good point. And maybe that's actually a good segue for me into another question, which is, so you mentioned, you know, you do your own research. You don't feel like you get the information in the smoothly packaged way that we would hope to get our information and to make decisions. For both of you, and maybe starting with Andrea, since you're in a completely different environment, how has your appreciation for government and science changed through this crisis?
Well, first of all, it's the first time in my life that I experience kind of like being proud to be Swiss, or not to be Swiss, but to be really grateful to live in Switzerland, because I think I can say I fully trust our government. I trust in democracy, and I trust in the science that is coming from and through and with our government. And I feel really safe, and I can tell by the look in people's eyes that this scaredness that was there in the beginning is completely gone. It's starting to shift in another way, that yeah, we're shifting towards higher numbers and higher infection rates and stuff. But I feel that the people out here are really positive and really trustful in government. And yeah, thank God we are a democracy, and thank God we have a school system that taught people to think for themselves and not to believe in what other people tell you. And yeah, I'm really proud of how the media, the government, the scientists are working together in this crisis, and trying to also to cool people down, like to calm down. It's going to be all right. It's going to be good. We are in charge of this. We got everything covered. Let's try to make this work together. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Anne's point of view, you know, assuming that some of this might be quite different, but also recognizing that here in the US, I guess we deal with different type of government, right? Like we have local and we have state, and then we have federal, and the responses have been so different. So Anne, what about you? How have you felt about the trust in government? And I mean, you mentioned some of it, but can you elaborate a bit?
Of course, yeah. And, you know, Andrea, when I just heard you talking, I'm like, oh my God, this sounds like a good place to be. And I don't feel like I'm in a similar place at all. So I feel the trust in the government has completely eroded through this crisis and how it was managed. It's almost to the point that it's a farce. It's a comedy show, you know, and it's actually a tragedy show. I think, you know, there's also a lot of good things that come out of this, because now we have to innovate all these government processes, like the DMV, for instance, which is like the car and, you know, the car bureau here in the United States, where you get your cars registered. So that has always been like the worst process ever, to have to go there. You have to stand there in line for hours and hours, and it's a very paper-driven process. So now the government in the cities and in the states is innovating on that. And I think there's a lot of things like that are coming out where we understand how inefficient the processes are and the government is, and therefore it's being innovated. But yeah, the sentiment in general is, and I think I hear that on social media and through my friends as well, that, you know, yeah, what I said, you have to get your own information. I listen to the German news a lot, especially back in February, March, when when Italy was exploding, I was definitely getting my news from Europe and was making decisions based on that. And I explained to somebody recently that you cannot take your information in the news from the news outlets anymore. You really have to get it from other people and experts that you know. And then I listened to myself and said, you know what, this sounds like we're in Venezuela here, or a country that is definitely not the United States. And that's quite shocking. And I definitely hope it's going to change. And of course, the election this year is making this all much, much worse, right? Because everything is a propaganda type of conversation these days. It's not about the truth. It's not about the facts. It's really all about re-election. And of course, that can't be the guiding star for discussion and a solution for a pandemic. And by the way, we have like, I think yesterday we had 1,500 people dying in one day, right? The days before is 1,000 people dying. This is well above the levels of World War II and World War I and even Korea and the other Vietnam War combined. You know, like I've seen some of these stats and it's just absolutely staggering. And nobody is really making a point about this in the government. Everybody's saying, no, everything's fine. We have completely under control. We're just testing a lot. And these are people. It's like a person a minute that's dying here in the United States right now because we haven't controlled this virus. And that sentiment is definitely completely different to, I think, what you're experiencing in Switzerland right now. But Gioia, I mean, you're here in the United States. You probably can speak to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with really everything you said. And I think you're also German, right? So with a foot, you live back there as well. And I live with a foot in Switzerland. And I actually had the privilege to spend a month there and breathe a very different air, which was to some extent very confusing, actually. It just felt like a different planet altogether. And then transitioning back into this reality was very abstract, to be honest, and surreal. It feels very surreal what's going on in the United States. And I do think the country is taking a huge hit in terms of credibility, trust, and cohesion internally, but also trust from outside. So that's something I personally really worry about. But I would also say, and since you're asking me, I'm usually the one that asking questions, but I think there is something about big crises and great ideas emerging out of those crises. And I think something that we will see happening once again is something will rise up from this. Ideas that will change the world, concepts that will change the world. So that in a way that gives me hope too. And there are so many people who are well-intentioned and who have incredible expertise, know-how, and drive and motivation to change things. So I guess those are the people you work with, and these kinds of people usually, often, I would say, come from places where being inventive and changing your own reality and the reality of people around you is up to the individuals and small communities. And whereas in Switzerland, this trust, this stability that is now such a safe harbor also means that there is probably less creativity that comes out of that. But I would actually love to hear Andrea on that, because Andrea, you're an artist. And how have you seen now the art scene specifically in Switzerland respond to this crisis, to this moment? And have you seen reactions outside of Switzerland that have inspired you, or how do you connect with outside of Switzerland as well in your artistic practice?
I have to say it's been really quiet, since there's also no venues going on. But I think people, since they had to spend more time inside, they were creating a lot, but it's just not out there yet. But I think it's a lot going on. And I know of a lot of people that are really bunkering themselves in their ateliers and in their art spaces and creating, because you actually have more time to create now. since it's less going on, it's less distraction. You have to be more, you're more focused. So I think in 6 months, 1 year, we're gonna see a lot of new exciting projects, art and venues and events and formats that are gonna come up. I mean, it's the same for me. I'm in the phase of creating right now. There's no output yet, but it's gonna be there. And yeah, what I've experienced is when I first visited Detroit. I think it was 3 years ago. It has nothing to do with the crisis, but it's the same example as you mentioned before. The people, because of all of these restrictions, they get so creative. And also because there was no help and no backup plan, they had to come up with one for themselves. So they get really creative. They get great ideas. I mean, I'm working with food. These people there in Detroit, they were raising their own tomatoes, potatoes, maize, everything was growing there. They produced their own food because in whole Detroit, you were only able to buy food in gas stations. It was chips, beef jerky, and Coca-Cola. So it was shocking for me to see that. And it's also shocking to see how this virus is also connected to our food and to our food system, the way we produce food, the way we eat, and especially in the US, because I was visiting the US quite often, regularly, and I was always shocked about the food and the quality of food and the price of the food. And so compared to Switzerland, it was absolutely shocking. I mean, I live in a town in the capital, Switzerland. I live in Bern. I have a small garden. I have 11 chickens in my small garden. I have tomatoes. I have figs. I have grapes. I have apple tree. I have everything in like 10 square meters. So I have my own poultry. I have eggs. I have the only thing I don't have is dairy, so like dairy milk. But since I live in Switzerland, that's no problem to get good, healthy milk. And yeah, it's incredible how food is being produced and how this is the main the trigger of all these illnesses and diseases, obesity, diabetes, all of these things. I mean, people are dying from COVID also because they have sicknesses already, because they are diabetic, because they are obese, and this all comes from lack of nutrition and wrong nutrition and einseitige nutrition. Yeah.
Do you feel, these are very important points, and I frankly haven't really heard much of a debate around that in the United States. The focus is on the virus. The focus is so much less on the underlying public health crisis that we have been experiencing for a long time in this country. So to both of you, do you feel that is something that is well understood and discussed, and this might be a moment for change?
It's a great question. So I think the United States are not doing so great on the death quotient of this disease, and maybe also cases overall, because of underlying pre-existing conditions. So I think the numbers are like 50% of United States Americans have some sort of underlying condition. So this might be obesity, diabetes, heart conditions, right? And all that comes from the lifestyle and the food, and it's not talked about enough in the media. I think it's very well understood in the medical world, and it's talked about a lot. And we also understand that the African American population and the Native American population is hit so hard, and in some cases 6-7 times more by corona right now than the white population in comparison, because of the pre-existing conditions and the nutrition for those populations, which again has to do with the money you have, because you can have wonderful fresh food in the United States, and especially here in California, all day long, but it costs a lot of money, similar to Switzerland in a way too. but you know, the typical population eats at fast food chains and has an incredible sugar intake each day. And all this leads to you not being super well, and your immune system not being able to deal with this virus very well. And I think we're not talking enough about it. That's, yeah, definitely not.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Maybe just in a short answer, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. We have a few questions. Andrea, what's the role of insects in all of that?
The role of insects? Well, I mean, insects, they are, except of their look, maybe for us, they are fantastic. They have a high percentage of protein. So protein will be the resource that will be lacking in the near future, since we are more and more people on the planet that craving for meat or for animal protein. And insects, they have a lot of positive aspects. They need less water, less food, less energy to grow them, but they have lots of animal protein. They have unsaturated fats. They have fibers that are really healthy for you and your stomach and your digesting system. And yeah, they could be a solution in the future to produce protein for the big masses. This doesn't have to be in the form of insects. I mean, the protein extraction is one big topic also here in Switzerland, which our scientists are working on that, to extract the protein from the insects. And then you have a color, transparent liquid that has actually no taste. So there's no taste in it. And you can put it in any convenient food that you like. So like with this tool, you can enrich all the convenient food with animal protein, which is actually healthy for the planet, but also for the human who consume it. So that's for sure the role of insects. But in the European or in the Western world, we have a big yuck factor. We think insects are disgusting, and we don't recognize them as food. My daughter, she grew up with insects as food. And for her, I mean, this is all social construct, the way we eat and what we eat. And that's why there's also a big problem in US, where you have schools that are only serving French fries and burgers. So how you want to educate people to eat healthier if the school is providing you only with fast food and you don't know what a carrot looks like, etc. And insects, I mean, you can prepare it in 1,000 different ways. And once you actually tried it and taste it, you are losing this disgust. It's totally possible to lose this disgust that you learned. Yeah. And but there's other protein sources that are more interesting for Europeans, algae or jellyfish or plant-based protein that are also really interesting, that they need less resources to produce them. But I think all in all, the main solution would be to cut down the beef consumption, beef and meat consumption in general. Everything else is not that important. Just don't eat meat that often. It's just not necessary, and it's actually not good for you nor the planet.
That should almost be the last word, Andrea. It's an important one, and I agree with you. Let me move on to the questions from the audience, and I'll start off with a question to Anne from Linda. As a community builder, what have been your biggest learnings around organizing virtual networking sessions? And what do you think are the motivations of people to join those sessions when there is such an overload of virtual events these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so we discussed this a lot with other community leaders here too, with groups like Hello Alice and board groups with board communities, etc. You have to be very specific of what you're going to give people in those sessions. who are you bringing? Why are you bringing those speakers? And how can those people help the people you invite to do whatever they need to do next? So for instance, if we have an IP lawyer like Haley Talbert from CIP from Seattle joining us, we have a lot of entrepreneurs joining who have IP questions and who have never really explored that. Then the other part is more the social networking events, where a lot of people crave just sort of that small breakout room where they can actually speak. So in this setting right now, I can't hear you, I can't see you. And so we can't connect on in the same level as if we're all in a breakout room and we're discussing a topic. And so in those settings, I think it's very, very important to set the rules to make sure that the breakout rooms are the right size, that people understand what they're supposed to talk about, and then you give them enough time as well, not too much, not too little. So I don't have the perfect formula yet. However, we're putting on a virtual summit. It's a whole week of interesting talks and webinars, keynotes and events, and also lounges. It's coming up in September on the 14th to the 18th, and you're very welcome to chime in and join. It's a free summit for entrepreneurs and female leaders. And yeah, we try to bring a lot of different formats together to serve the different communities. So I think it's a great question. We haven't exhausted the answers yet, and we're still in a trial and error mode there. But I'm very excited to see the different formats. And I sometimes compare it to our Jeffersonian dinners that we did here in San Francisco at our members' houses, where 10 people came together and everybody had like 5 or 7 minutes to speak and to get the room's response to their point. And we went around the room and everybody had that time and nobody was talking at the same time. So in Zoom, it's the exact same thing, right? You can't talk over each other. And so it's the same format and it gives people a lot of time and depth to the conversation. And I really like that part about it too.
Great. Yes, I think we're all experimenting and tinkering, and I think it's also really important to learn with each other and from each other around those kinds of new formats and new ways of doing things. To a completely different question now, and this is to both of you, so feel free to just take the word if you feel like you're ready to answer it. From Laura, how do you think that the focus on trust and reliance on government that we see in Switzerland, for example, about finding solutions, but also the distrust that we talked about here in the United States, where people really have to figure it out themselves, how might that affect the mid and long-term outcomes for COVID in the United States versus Switzerland or Europe? Was that question clear?
I didn't get the last verb.
How might the outcomes of the COVID crisis turn out in Europe versus the United States if we think about it as a question of trust in government versus self-reliance?
I think it's not so much a question of government and trust in government, but the question of if there's a social contract in the society we live in. And in Switzerland and Europe generally, I feel like there is a social contract where you are part of the community, you support each other, you understand you're in that together, versus here in the United States, where it's an incredibly individualistic country, and I lived in many different countries, so I think it's definitely on the top of the list, where everybody is, for themselves. And so my hope is that this crisis will move us more towards a social contract where we understand that we're part of that whole construct, and that government can give us the guiding rails, hopefully at some point here, but that it's really on us to decide what kind of a society we want to live in. And that's not just if we meet other people and are asymptomatic and then pass on the disease and the weakest in the community die. It's also around questions like education pots in the Bay Area right now. The schools are not opening, so it's all online still the next semester. And that means that families are struggling to get their kids educated in a setting that works for everybody and they can keep the work. So now they're starting to create these education pots. And the question comes up, well, should we include kids who don't have the means, from families who don't have the means to pay for that, right? And shall we include those kids for free? And those kinds of questions are coming up. And those are not necessarily government questions. Those are questions of the society that we need to decide on and say, okay, do we have a social contract? Do we actually believe in equality? What does that look like? And how do we want to live with this disease and with all its repercussions that come with it?
And then I would add that clearly that depends on where you live as well. I think in San Francisco, we're in a very liberal, progressive part of the United States where some of those values of equality are more ingrained in the collective mentality. And that might look very different depending on where you go. So yeah, I think that's a very good point. What's the social contract? And that is a bottom-up creation and construct, actually. Any thoughts on this, Andrea, or is it okay for you if we start closing?
Just want to add that we are shifting towards individualism in every sector of business, science, whatsoever. And I think this crisis shows us now that maybe to be a society and to live together and to work together and to engage with each other is not something that comes from communism only. So, yeah, I think individualism, what you mentioned, Anne, is not always leading towards a better place to live.
So let me use this as a really good opportunity to actually close. And some of the things I have heard here was the opportunities created in this moment around the ability to create global communities and being sort of location-less, and that opens entirely new possibilities for a lot of organizations that are active in community building, for example. We also talked about facing death, dealing with death, and how, in a way, Corona might have shifted all of our, and especially in your case, Andrea, since you have really delved into that topic, our own level of comfort with thinking about big risks, with thinking about pandemics, but also thinking about specifically death. And you talked about the importance of the why, and how in a moment like that, everything gets stripped down to the basic questions. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And if there's anything good that comes from this crisis, it might be, and it hopefully is, for those that are in a position to make those choices, to really focus on the things that they think really matter and make a difference in their lives and in the world and in the lives of others around us. And that sort of takes us to the question, or to the big topic of the social contract. What's the society we want to live in? So we're also at a juncture in history where we are given the chance to now rethink the society we want to live in and the world we want to live in. And it is up to us to make this, to take this opportunity and really make the changes we want to see in the world, in our own lives. And even if that's stopping to eat meat or eating less meat, but all of those small actions in the collective have a global impact. And having that awareness, which has been given to us because we understand now how a pandemic functions, that the individual behavior of every one of us has an impact on the collective, and that individualism is not the answer. I think that's a huge learning of this time, and one that I hope we will all take forward. So last question, closing, to both of you, just to take it back to the very individual, not individualism, but individual level. What brings you joy these days? In one word. Anne.
Connecting.
Love that. Andrea?
Love and being loved.
Wonderful. No better way to end than this. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Thank you, audience, for hanging on, and for your questions as well. Really appreciate it. And we hope to have you back again on a future talk with us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.